The next panel, you can come on up. This is the future of airspace management. And anyone who's had the chance to see the Skyway pod will have some physical insight into that. But this group is moderated by a distinguished leader with a long history of working within the Federal Aviation Administration. Abby Smith is the founder and CEO of Anders Smith Solutions, and a recent inductee into the Hall of Fame for Women in Emerging Aviation Technologies. Abby brings over 3 decades of federal service, including senior executive leadership roles at the FAA, where she led major programs in UAS integration, aviation policy, workforce training, and airspace modernization. With deep expertise in the federal policy, strategic partnerships, and emerging aviation technologies, she now advises clients across the industry and continues to shape the future of aviation. And perhaps for this event, most importantly, she is perhaps the oldest friend, not in years of age, but in terms of history, of our summit chair, Saracena Tukin.
Yeah, we've known each other since we were 15 years old, so it's been a hot minute, and it's been really fun to be teenagers together, but it's also been really fun to be quasi-adults together. So, hey everybody, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Let's try again, because look, we know that we are standing between y'all and drinks. So let's try this again. Good afternoon. Yeah, that's what I like to hear. So we have hasn't this been a great day? So yeah, thank you, Dart, and everybody that's been a contributor to this, because I've really gotten some great learning out of it. It's been wonderful networking, great programming. I'm looking forward to hanging out and visiting after we finish up here today. But we've really heard a lot today about workforce. We've heard about what's required at airports. We've heard what do the manufacturers need, what are the use cases, and so we saved the best for last. We're going to talk about airspace infrastructure. Woohoo! Can I get an amen? So we've got quite a panel today. So let's start by let me give you a brief introduction of these amazing people that I have the pleasure to talk with. Jimmy Parrish, he's the business director of Aquasi. What is Aquasi? Well, glad you asked. It's the Alaska Center for UAS Integration. Jimmy has been born and raised in Fairbanks, Alaska. Yes, he's a native, a multi-generational Alaskan, as a matter of fact, and he grew up downhill ski racing, naturally. A former aide to Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Jimmy also spent time in the Bay Area working in public policy for the San Jose Silicon Valley Chamber of Commerce and California Apartment Association. Next, we've got Andrew Carter, but just call him Carter. That's what he likes. He's the co-founder and CEO of Resilience. That's Resilience with an X. Resilience designs and enables beyond visual line of sight ecosystems for small drones up to future eVTOLs. Carter has been integrating drones in the National Airspace System for 18 years. Prior to Resilience, he was the architect of the U.S. Army's ground-based Sense and Avoid system. He's led systems engineering for some of the country's largest UAS traffic management and beyond visual line of sight projects. And he led the Detect and Avoid working group for an internationally renowned standards organization called RTCA. Next in our esteemed list of guests is Don Berchoff, or you can call him Weather Don. Weather Don is the CEO of True Weather Solutions, a micro-weather analytics company that their V360 software and services that will increase flight safety and reduce weather impacts for UAS and eVTOL operations. Don has over 4 decades of experience in weather, aviation, and logistics. Don is a retired Air Force colonel and a former science and technology director at the National Weather Service. Next, Clifford Cruz, the CEO of Skyway. He brings over 2 decades of expertise in cybersecurity in the cybersecurity industry, where he's made significant contributions through the development of enterprise security products. As a professional inventor, he holds numerous patents that have shaped iconic products and services across communication systems, phototechnic technologies, and enterprise cyber software. Since entering the advanced air mobility sector in 2020, Clifford has been instrumental in pioneering GPU-based aerospace risk management systems. Say that fast. 3D geospatial rendering, vertiport management systems, automated corridor solutions, and vertiport route transportation network methods. Wow, that's a lot. Last but certainly not least is my friend Rob Heilman. He currently serves as the Director of Engineering for Product Development at GBL. Prior to this really innovative private company, Rob dedicated his career to public service, including as a flight test engineer, managing the Secretary of Defense's research portfolio for testing uncrewed and autonomous systems, leading federal research for autonomous automobiles, and most recently as the inaugural director of the Highly Automated Systems Safety Center of Excellence that was charged to ensure that the United States Department of Transportation has the capacity and expertise to validate the safety of highly automated systems across all modes of transportation. So there you have it. So before we dive into the content of this panel, I have a few ground rules. 1, DYA. Define your acronyms. Each of us live in a world full of them, and they mean something different to almost everyone. So when I have a buzzer, and I'll buzz you if we need a DYA. Number 2, these are some smart panelists. I mean, really, really smart panelists. And not one is a shrinking violet. I don't know if you heard over there, I had to calm them down. They all started singing in the background over there. So I have a timer, and I'm asking the panelists to limit their answers to no more than 3 minutes, so we have time and a chance to hear from everyone and address questions from you, our summit participants. So hey, we've got the Slido QR code, ask early, ask often. It's a little take on Chicago voting. So, okay, now we're ready to go. So I've got to keep everybody awake here. Okay, so Jimmy, batter up.
Okay.
Alaska's infrastructure is completely dependent on aviation. So, what's Alaska doing specifically that the lower 48 can parallel for a more cohesive and inclusive national airspace system as we think about bringing on these highly automated, different-sized vehicles?
Well, thanks, Abby, and thanks everybody for having me. It's always great for me to come back to this area and the Bay Area. I got married at Memchu, so I always like coming back here. So Alaska is unique, and we always like to kind of bring it up, but in terms of this conversation and when we're talking about infrastructure investment, the way we like to kind of start this off, especially from an Alaska perspective, is yes, we are an aviation state. We're highly dependent on aviation. For those that don't really know Alaska and our geography, we're about a fifth the land mass of the United States. We're more than twice the size of Texas, but yet only 20% of our communities are accessible by road. So that being said, how do we access, all of our rural communities off the road system? And because of that, because of that highly dependent on aviation, we start looking at, from a safety perspective, how do we support this, right? And so manned aviation for us is very important. For those that also don't know, 44% of all fatal incursions in the national airspace happen in Alaska's airspace, right? How do we start to solve that problem if we're going to introduce a new element into that airspace? So this is where, again, we start talking about infrastructure investment and using that infrastructure to solve some of these problems. So the way we start to look at this, and so I kind of keep within 3 minutes, is if we can start to put the infrastructure in Alaska that can reduce the risk and solve some of those manned aviation or lack of infrastructure to support manned aviation, we will start to then enable drone operations. And the reason we believe that is the infrastructure that we'll start to implement into places like rural Alaska will be next generation kind of technology. It should support the kind of aviation that we're looking in the future. So to kind of wrap things up a little bit, how we parallel things, right? If you start to look at how you support manned aviation now, right, and how it can start to parallel from a more of a next generation thought process, right? How do we support glass cockpits? How do we support, next generation avionics in a manned aviation? That going forward should be very similar to how avionics is going to work in drone operations. So just from a parallel, how do you support aviation as a general should get you to the next generation. So that just to kind of wrap things up from a parallel perspective, that kind of helps.
You still had 40 seconds. You're doing great. Okay, so we'll roll to Carter. Carter, drones fly all the time without any additional supporting aviation infrastructure. Why can't we just use existing air traffic management and air traffic control infrastructure for uncrewed vehicles? It's an easy question.
I'm going to take my role from James this morning and do my 15% lean in. So if I get a little bit overcocked here, it's not because I'm in distress. So I think it's really interesting when we start looking at airspace integration, right? We've heard from a lot of OEMs about the vehicles. We've heard from a lot of airports about the ground infrastructure, the vertiports, where these things are going to take off and land. This panel is kind of unique in what we've heard today in the airspace integration piece. Right? The missing piece we haven't talked about much today is air traffic control, air traffic management. Sure, the things can fly, but how do you fly at scale? How do you fly routinely? How do you fly safely with all the other actors in the airspace? And so when we do that every day, right? That's what air traffic control exists for, is getting that level of scale that our aviation industry really takes advantage of. So when we start to look at drones, right now, a lot of things are done under Part 107. There's a person standing there flying the thing very manually. These things aren't flying beyond their line of sight. They're not flying at high levels of scale, meaning there's not swarms of these things doing all kinds of great activities all over the place. But that's where the industry is trying to get to. That's where, where there's money, where there's unit economics. And so when we start to look at what is the infrastructure that supports that, why don't we just use the current infrastructure? What we've really learned there is that the current infrastructure doesn't support low altitude operations. It doesn't support operations in urban environments. And it really doesn't support the scale of operations that we're trying to get to. And so if we can't use the current infrastructure, and the FAA more or less isn't willing to let us use it, right? They've kind of said, hey, you can't overload it. You can't use our ATC controllers. Our systems can't be used. ADS-B can't be used with drones. It's too saturated. And so we get this clean slate, and we get a clean sheet of music to try to figure out, okay, what is the next gen of infrastructure? The problem is that the FAA doesn't know how to deal with the next gen of aviation infrastructure. So you get a lot of innovation. There's a lot of really cool technology out there, but a lot of it's still in the R&D state, proving out that it can perform the way the FAA expects it to perform. And I think that's really what we've seen, is that we need new infrastructure. We need to support scale. We need to support low altitude. We need to support urban. And what exactly that infrastructure is, it's not what it looks like today, and the industry, I think, is trying to get to a point where we know what it's going to look like in the future.
Thank you. So, as a former air traffic controller, the idea that these little tiny aircraft are going to be flying around at really low altitude, and then we were going to add new and novel concepts was a lot to manage. And unless y'all have been asleep for the last several months, you're aware there's a lot going on in the news right now. And there's been a lot going on with aviation safety. And I even got interviewed by some VC people about my opinion on whether or not a certain individual and his team could come in and just revamp the ATC. And I said, the National Airspace System is not a startup. It's not a startup. But it makes me wonder, Clifford, after just being in your really cool simulator situation, in your opinion, is it possible for us to upgrade our air traffic control system to accommodate these advanced aviation technologies? And where do you see the industry going right now?
So when we started the company, we looked at, I'm a cyber guy, defense guy, so the only thing close to me with planes at the time was to get on them and to go to, the East Coast or somewhere. And so we kind of looked at it from a really outside perspective, but from a technology standpoint. And what we saw was, to Andrew's point, like a really great clean slate on how to approach this. And what we saw was, when we looked at the laws, and in order to understand what we were going to build, is what were the regulatory frameworks of the US and how did this all work? And we saw gaps, the gray areas in regulation and gray areas between the state and the Fed, and how the FAA was formed in the United States. And we saw a lot of the arguments happening on the state side. If these are going over my city, can I stop it, right? Can I make a city rule of a community for a HOA to say no drones over my community? The FAA is absolutely not. That's our airspace, right? We had a running joke in the early days of the company that a trampoline was essentially an illegal flight launching thing, right? The moment your feet came off the trampoline, you're an unidentified flying object, right, to the FAA. So, how do we overcome that as a technology company, given that there's just so many laws to get to where we need to get to autonomy? And obviously, there's the safety element of it. Us as a country, given that everything in the news, we have a great safety record, to be honest. It's
amazing.
It's quite a miracle that we're able to do what we do at such the scale that we're doing it as is, right? So, kudos to the FAA to really be on that strength. But when it comes to what we're trying to accomplish, it's really around trusting the machines, trusting the safety elements, creating those redundancies, and a lot of the stuff Resilience is doing is trying to figure out how do we overcome some of the challenges in the regulatory frameworks for certification, and how do we make sure that everybody's kind of following the same rules. So there is a great pathway there, right? There is a way to where we can broker from a private entity point working with the FAA to make the voices of cities and counties and states heard, right? To making sure that they have an opinion and they have the power to say, I kind of really don't want this going over my community, or maybe we just go a little higher, or how does the police department get involved, right, when they have drones and stuff like that. So I want to say that there's definitely a path forward here. The FAA is really looking, and where the industry is working on, is a new class of airspace for us to kind of all work together and getting into the future. It's looking pretty bright for everyone. And I think right now the sentiment of the FAA is really embracing this, and that's so super cool as a country, to where we're living in a time where private industry is about to revolutionize this whole space. And at Skyway, as you can see, if you haven't seen our pods, we've really kind of decided and revamped what the business model was for this, right? We knew that a lot of the businesses were trying to figure out, what is this business? There's just so many small business models trying to work to a bigger business models in a much ecosystem. And so what you're seeing there is kind of a collaboration of all different kinds of companies in the AAM industry to come together to solve this and be profitable as a company and moving it forward, right? So that's my answer to that.
So before we go on, in general, with anybody on the panel, are there, in addition to figuring out kind of this additional collaboration that needs to go on at the very low altitudes? Good, thank you folks for bringing in questions. Does anybody else want to comment, besides Weather Don, because I'm going to you next, buddy, about what additional support for future aviation infrastructure looks like, so that we really create this vision of, and I think Anwar said democratization. And I mean, when I was an executive, my charge was, I think this is the way to democratize the skies. And it's very exciting for access for people that never dreamed that they would have access to the skies. But in order to do that, where we include legacy aircraft, drones, autonomous airframes, and electrified vertical takeoff and landing, what else is needed? Just speed round from anybody? Want to throw out a word?
Happy to jump in. So I think one thing, you said define your own acronyms. What we haven't defined is infrastructure, right? Aviation infrastructure, a lot of people in this room are in aviation, but some aren't, right?
Yeah.
So usually we need communications, navigation, surveillance, and some kind of weather infrastructure. So you have kind of these 4 key things, but then there's also digital infrastructure that goes into play, where you're looking at air traffic, traditionally air traffic control systems. When we look at uncrewed systems, looking at UAS traffic management, and some of the advances in that industry. So I wanted just to clarify, when we're up here talking about infrastructure, we live and breathe it every day, we know what we're actually talking about.
And then really quickly, I would say it's going to be the acceptance of those to adopt new technologies and be comfortable with those technologies. That's going to be a huge step forward, is are you comfortable with some of these technologies? We talk a little bit about this, what we've had with some ATC folks, like we won't accept remote towering. Well, I can understand that in some places like in LAX, you don't want something automated running that by yourself. But you take a place like Alacac, Alaska, which has absolutely nothing. If you had a remote tower there, now a plane coming in there has some sort of situational awareness so it can land. So you start to look at, yes, you don't want automation everywhere, but you have to look at where are there holes and where can we solve some of those holes with some technology.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could add to that too. What's great about advanced air mobility is that these aircraft, especially the eVTOLs, are really advancing. They have the opportunity to advance in the avionics of what future flight will be. And so all of these companies that are doing this is a path forward for all the commercial airspace to adopt in the future. So it's essentially one giant test bed, if you will, on commercial services, right? That allows us to learn from it and really kind of grow into that aspect that will eventually lead to the commercial side in much higher altitudes.
Someone's got a question about your shoes. You might want to talk to them later about it.
I'm a little jealous because I think my shoes are sweeter than his, but that's okay. Man.
I mean, Rob, I like your shoes too, man. You look great.
Thank you, Andy.
So I'm going to go to Weather Dawn real quick. Weather Dawn, why on earth would we need to improve low altitude weather infrastructure for drones, urban air mobility operations, and airspace safety and management?
So let me ask a question.
Oh, no.
How many people here are helicopter pilots? Anybody? No? All right. How many is a GA pilot? Anybody? Okay.
Oh my God.
How do you feel about the low altitude weather information you get today when you
I
have to
forgot
plan?
to turn my timer on.
Oh, look at that. Look at the thing. All these down, In 2005, I was responsible for writing the next gen weather ConOps for JPDO.
DYA.
Okay, Joint Program Office. Next Gen was the next generation air traffic system for FAA in 2005. And I was on the Air Force staff at that time, and later I went to the Weather Service. And what I'm telling you is that we haven't upgraded our low altitude weather measurements in this country since we put out the Doppler weather radar in 1991. We do not have measurements below 5,000 feet of wind except around an airport. We have, between here and Hollis, the nearest place to get weather information right now is at Marina Airport, Hollister, and Salina. There is no winds above that level. The ceiling and visibility is only measured there. It's not measured anywhere else. So everything else is a mystery. Now, we've done a great job with our models. I'm very proud of my industry for what we've been able to do with so little data. But if you want to know why you have helicopter crashes with people on board, the best weather sensor we have today, the best weather infrastructure we have today is the pilot, it's eyeballs. As soon as you take the pilot off the aircraft, you've lost all your heuristics. Everything that's undetectable today and unknown, it will remain that way. And so the bottom line is this, is we've needed to upgrade our weather infrastructure for 30 years. The money's not there. When I was a science and technology director, I was advocating for 400 profilers around the country to measure temperature and winds. You know what I'm talking about, James, from the ground up. They cut the only profilers we had in 2010. That was the way we can measure the wins. So I realized that the way this problem is going to get solved is not with the federal government. It's going to have to be public-private partnership, and it has to be a business case that's so strong that people will invest in it. And once we do that, we'll close these gaps, and we'll have so much better weather information for wind, for battery power management, for distance traveled, weight carried, ceiling visibility. It'll be so much better that we will get a 30% return on investment, which will drive the revenue of this industry up. Because weather is the biggest cost you have, your biggest uncontrolled cost. Weather uncertainty, 30% of the time today when drones and air taxi, when helicopters and GA cancel or delay due to weather, they could have flown, right? How many times do people get upset? But yet they always tell me the weather system's good enough. You know why? Because they're not the CFO of the company. They're not the CEO of the company. These folks we've had up here today, hey, I've listened to everybody else. I have one more minute. All right.
No,
So
you're 3 minutes.
if I was the CEO sitting up here today, I bet you they don't understand what the cost of weather will be on their business. I guarantee you it's going to be significant. It's called the weather tax, 30%, New York City. We can get a third of that back with better weather infrastructure, and that will drive millions of dollars a year in more revenue per aircraft. So we've got to make this investment, because if we don't, the industry is going to be passing that cost on to the consumer, which you all pay for today. When I got delayed at San Francisco last night, you know, we were really set up behind. So this is why it's not good enough, and we need to work at making it better.
And to Don's point a little bit, right? So FAA reauthorization came out last year, and part of the FAA reauthorization, Alaska got a little portion, Don Young Safety Initiative, late great Don Young, colleague of Congressman Geppert's, and part of that whole initiative is $120 million specifically for weather stations in Alaska. Now, everyone's, well, and it's still not enough, right?
It's not enough.
It's not even close to enough to get at what the real problem is. And Don's 100% right. I mean, we just recently had another crash in Alaska, you know, a couple of weeks ago, 100% on weather, right? The NTPSB report's going to come back, and it came back that Bering Air, who is a wonderful airline in Alaska and continues to have to service rural Alaska, came back, well, they were overweight. Listen, everybody operates overweight in Alaska. That's just the way they do. What they didn't have was good weather data to get them from point A to point B, and that plane got up there, and it got sent out to a holding pattern, and it came back and didn't come back. So that was the problem. We didn't have good weather data in
When we
Alaska.
scale this industry, these are just, you know, these are not a lot of aircraft compared to what we're planning on doing. If you're trying to flow 10 aircraft an hour into a vertiport, your flow will get totally hosed up if you don't have better weather data.
Right.
They'll be diverting, they'll have limited power. So I'm just trying to paint the picture.
You did. You're a heck of a good painter, Don. So,
Do you want me to sing for you now?
and I think this is a
has better
perfect
shoes?
segue to talk to the man with the other great shoes on the panel, Rob. Rob, it seems like there's so much of the technology driving aviation innovation advances that has its lineage in the Department of Defense, where you spent a lot of your public service time. And there may be viable business use cases in the defense sector. So, can and should advanced aviation community leverage the technology's expertise, intelligence, and infrastructure from the defense world?
Thank you, Abby, and I appreciate the compliment on the shoes.
You're welcome.
I'm pretty loud. I said turn it down, not up. So, first of all, thanks, Josh and Saracina, for allowing me to be here. Congressman Gephardt, I'm a massive fan. And one of the reasons is you're still here. You were a keynote, and you're still here. And that is amazing. And your wife, your beautiful wife. And so I know I'm going to get buzzed.
You're gonna get buzzed.
Okay, all right. So I don't know, Abby, has the military got much of history in aviation, drones,
Little.
autonomy?
They might be the biggest airline in the country.
Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, so one thing about the defense with this kind of technology is we know, I'm not we anymore, I'm not there anymore. I spent 30 years with DOD and then like about another 8 or so with DOT. And almost all of it with autonomy and cyber, and a lot of it with test. And so one thing about DoD is they know they're going to operate in a contested environment. They know they're going to get jammed. They know they're going to get hacked. They know they're going to lose GPS, right? They know they're going to lose comms, right? And so that means they're going to have to be pretty dang robust, right? And so we also, once we start, I had the pleasure of managing DoD at the OSD, Office of Secretary of Defense level, their S&T Science and Technology program for testing autonomy and cyber. I also part of the Defense Acquisition University's initial curriculum, set that up with a few people for how do you test autonomy. And I sat in the basement of the Pentagon as a test guy for working out the initial policy for laws, lethal autonomous weapon systems. So did kind of a lot of stuff for DoD in this world. And that was like 15 years ago. So this is kind of like deja vu all over again. But thrilled to be part of this. But there are a lot of lessons that can be applied. And in some cases, I don't see them necessarily always being applied. Certainly not when I was at DOT. And that's really no hit on DOT. I thought I went to DOT to help share those lessons, but a lot of them aren't being necessarily totally leveraged. One of the things we did at DOD, though, is we learned that as you work towards autonomy, you're working in an unbounded state space, right? So you can't do everything live. You just can't, you know? And so we really had to start using this thing called live virtual constructive, right? LVC, right? And so I really hope that DOT starts moving in that direction and others. And so start picking up some of the simulation stuff. So I hope the OEMs are really working hard towards simulation. And so one of the things that I did at DOT was work with my friends from OST Policy, and we sunk $10 million into setting up a live virtual constructive environment for automation, right? And now they are working on connecting that to DOD's live virtual constructive environment, right? Which is called a Joint Mission Environment Test Capability, and their cyber and distributed and cyber network, right? Which is National Cyber Range, right? So now DOT is hooking up their Joint Transportation T&E capability, which is now going to be connected to VOLPE, right? And they're connecting that to DOD's live virtual constructive environment, and then they're going to connect it to the National Cyber Range, DOD's cyber capability, right? And then DOD is connecting all of their OEMs. They have connected all their OEMs to that. And so I hope that Joby and you other guys, and then the tech providers, and you guys connect your simulations to these networks, right? And this is how you're able to go ahead and get a very robust test environment, right? And be able to knock that stuff out. Now, also out here in California, you have the world's largest sea range, a test range, that goes from Ventura all the way to Monterey County. 35,000 square miles of controlled airspace, okay, that you can just get to, right, with a commercial services agreement that we're working on, okay? And they own a private island that you can do live cyber and electronic warfare testing, okay? Take advantage of that, you know? You can also do, there's a COLA going on out there through you, okay? Okay, all right. I'm getting buzzed.
Yeah.
I'm buzzed.
But we're going to come back to you because
Not as much as I will be in about an hour. So talk to me.
You know,
then.
there's one in every panel.
Yeah.
So, so speaking of COAs, great segue. That's a certificate of authority to fly.
Sorry. Yeah, the acronym buzz. I got the acronym buzz.
Oh,
and the
you
timer
got
buzz.
buzzed on so many ways,
my
Rob.
God.
But there was a question that went up here, and it was a perfect dovetail into a question that I had for Jimmy anyway. And the question was about how is Alaska authorizing testing in California? And when I was one of the executives in the UAS integration office, we had, and I heard FAA test sites mentioned earlier today, we had 7 that are currently authorized, hopefully more because of the 2024 reauthorization, but right now there's only 7 in the country that are truly authorized. And Jimmy and Kathy Cahill, who's the director of Aquasi, have programs that include the FAA test site, the Beyond program, and Assure, which is a research grant for UAS that's run out of Mississippi State University, is that right?
Yeah, they're the lead.
Yeah, but I know you're one of the primary schools. But I think it's important because it ties into this California testing question. What are you doing? How are these three things under the Sequoia program helping to really build out Carter's favorite word, infrastructure at aviation, for drones and advanced air mobility in the NAS?
So that's a pretty loaded question.
Yeah.
So I'll try to peel the onion back on that a little bit. So yeah, Abby mentioned we're one of the 7 test sites for the FAA. We're also like Mr. Grimsley over there, or Dr. Grimsley over there, we're one of the Beyond programs, and then we are also, Aquasi sits as one of the leads or core schools in the Assure program, which is the safety grant program for FAA for drone integration. Unique about Aquasi, the University of Alaska Fairbanks, is we're the only program in the United States that has all 3 of those FAA integration programs under one director. So Dr. Kathy Cahill is the PI for all 3 of those programs.
What's a PI?
Principal investigator, sorry.
Not Magnum?
Well, hey, listen, it could be. But that being said, so when the test site program was enacted in 2013, Alaska came in as a consortium with Hawaii and Oregon. Uniquely, and that was unique compared to the other 6 locations. The FAA, when they handed back the awardees, the University of Alaska Fairbanks was the only public entity inside that consortium, so that's why we were awarded the full test site. So that's why it's called the Alaska Test Site. But we also wanted to keep the consortium, and so we honored that by establishing ranges in Oregon and in Hawaii. So that's why there's Pendleton, Tillamook, Warm Springs, which doesn't exist really anymore, but Northwest UAV in McMinnville, those are operating. And then when COVID hit and inability to travel, we started getting a lot of folks wanting not only to test with us, but try to figure out how can we test but stay in our own backyard. And so we took the business model that we had as the consortium and went ahead and started to operate that around the rest of the United States. And really what we were looking at as in from the test site mission, which is safe integration of drones to the national airspace. That's just the blanket mission of the test site program. That being said, we went back to Abby's boss, Jay Merkel, and said, hey, would you have a problem with us actually going around and working with these public entities and really actually, as the test site, putting the authority down in those areas so they can start to act as if and do the public missions and public support missions that really should they be doing anyway. And so kind of what we did is kind of reversed it on the FAA and said, hey, what you guys are all talking about now, how do we get our communities involved? How do we from the ground up give us the resources to start to put these things in the air and do the public support missions that we want to do? And this is where I went to Dr. Cahill and said, hey, how about you just let me fly around the country and I'll start to work with these states and these communities and get them to realize that the power is actually within their own hands. They just need to realize what kind of investments they need to make, and we can give them that authority and they can kind of do that on their own. And so that's kind of what we've done in terms of modeling that across. Give me an extra minute here. So just so you guys know, the Alaska Test Site currently is holder of 67 COAs across the United States. We're in roughly 17 states where we're operating. We have partnerships with 20 states. And really the goal is to work with those states, those communities, and allow them to realize that if you make these investments, you will start to have these kinds of operations. And so to give kind of an example, right, Monterey DART is a very good example of one of our first COAs in California. And actually, Chris Bly, when he talked to us initially about this, was for this very reason, was this community right here. How do we start to get Monterey to talk to the rest of California about the fact that we want to do AAM? Okay, well, you need to start doing these things. You need to start having maybe some drone operations at your airport that gets them talking to the rest of the airline or rest of the aviation community that these are the things that we're going to be doing, heads up, right? So San Bernardino is another COA that we've just enacted in the last few months. Took us about 2 years to get that going. Why? Because we had to really work with the tower to get them to understand, hey, we get as a contract tower that you may not want to do this, but we actually have the permission around you to do this. So why don't we start to work together as a community, as organizations, to figure out, why are you uncomfortable doing this? Let's get you to comfortable, right? And that's really the conversation we're really doing with all of these communities is, we know you're uncomfortable, how do we get you to comfortable? Up in Alaska, right, we have a manned aviation problem where I'm not trying to say that, where we do kill people, right? How do we solve that? How do we use technology to solve that problem? And in the end, can we parallel that down to the lower 48 to where you are more comfortable with potentially automated solutions? So if that wraps it up for you guys a little bit. That's how Alaska is bringing itself down and acting as the test site for the rest of the lower 48.
Thank you. So Carter, there are a lot, there are a lot of business models out there. What, for how you get into infrastructure investment, what business models have you seen work for infrastructure investment in airspace modernization and deployment?
Yeah, so I think the problem that a lot of commercial industry has had is that no individual operator or individual infrastructure really has the business case right now to deploy their own infrastructure. Right? Wing's not going out and putting up a radar every time they want to do drone delivery. It's just the unit economics don't really work. The scale's not there. The price of stuff is too expensive. And then you also have the issue where if one company puts the infrastructure in and they're also trying to use the infrastructure, it probably doesn't make sense to let their competitors use the infrastructure, right? So it actually is a negative for the overall industry if you're relying on private investment of the operators to supply their own infrastructure. So we've seen a couple of different models that I think are viable. One is that infrastructure companies, whether it's weather or surveillance or communications, they put their own infrastructure in and then they try to supply it to all the different people that are trying to use it and operate it. What we've seen as an issue there is that there's just not enough scale in the industry right now to support that today. So that's, a lot of those companies are doing that and they're hoping that the scale gets there and they're kind of banking on that. And then the one that we've really pushed forward and tried to lean into is the public-private partnership, which I think has been talked about a number of times today, where the states have reasons outside of pure financial gain to actually put infrastructure in, whether it's drone as a first responder, some of the, we saw the jump arrow, saving lives in your rural communities, economic development, right? Keeping companies in your state or attracting companies to your state. All the different use cases for drones and eVTOLs that exist, again, some of them are public good, they're saving lives, they're saving time, they're saving money. It's not purely an economic investment at the state level. And we've seen that story goes a long way to getting infrastructure in various regions around the country, and then building on that, right? Seeing, okay, well, if we put the infrastructure in, what operations are happening? How do we measure the viability of this? Is it improving the lives of our constituents? And what we think is the answer and a lot of that's still fairly early going in most regions in the US, and what we've seen is positive results. And I think the idea is that happens in one region within a state, and the state says, okay, this is kind of what worked, let's do it in the next region, And then states that are a little bit slower to adopt say, hey, New York or Ohio or North Carolina is doing this, why don't we do something similar, and we'll put in similar infrastructure. And the business model that I've seen is that really working. And then the states charge the data as a service for the use of their infrastructure, or some use service, which takes care of the O&M cost of that infrastructure and recoups some of that upfront investment.
Awesome, thank you. So, Weather Don.
So I
Wait,
think,
you wanted to riff off him?
well,
Go.
No, ask the question because then I can rip off him. It's the same. Go ahead, ask the question.
Okay, because you can riff.
No, go ahead.
It's okay. Well, so, talking about infrastructure, and I was going to ask you, do you think we need to invest? Because there's already lots out for aviation, but I'm not going there. I'm not poking that bear.
I was hoping you would not read that after my initial.
But
Read the panel.
But it begs the F word, funding.
Right.
What did you think I was going to say? So, do you really need additional weather infrastructure? I think you've answered that very clearly. But where are we going to get this funding?
Right.
Again,
So-
unless you're asleep, there's a pretty big narrative if people are going to try to tap at the federal well right now.
Yeah, I've
that's
given up
pretty
on that.
disturbing.
Yeah, no, I saw that in 2010 when I was the science and technology director. People were, thinking that we're going to get this funding for all this weather capabilities in the next 20, 30 years, and I had already given up on that. And I had started thinking about public-private partnership for this network I wanted to, that we were trying to get out. But I didn't have a vehicle to do it. I had to wait for the right business case. And when I started my company in 2015, it was all about unlocking the power of science and technology trapped in labs and universities that we weren't getting out. We have so much more capability than we're experiencing today. It drives me crazy. So once I saw the drone industry, I said, that's the business case, because you can't get around it. At some point, you're going to start flying at scale. You're going to be canceling more missions than you're telling your investors, and you're going to have your back against the wall. And so I just got to work on this in 2017. I show up at shows, and people make fun of me. Oh, we have the weather we need. I don't know why we need you. And I said, don't worry, you'll see. And sure enough, we worked on ASTM weather standard. ASTM's a standard body. So the big challenge to this funding problem is the extraordinary cost of weather systems that are certified today. Yeah. So your ASOSs and your AWOSs at the airports,
So
they have
what are those?
500,000 weather stations at airports.
Thanks.
Weather sensors.
Say again?
Really expensive.
Really expensive. This is Cliff's great. He always tries to simplify. Thanks. No, really expensive weather sensors at airports. $500,000 to $1.5 million. They're just weather stations. And that same weather capability today, maybe not to the 100% extent, but you can get 90% of that capability for $30,000. The problem is, and that's why helicopters, the choice is between a windsock and a $500,000 weather station, and that's why we don't have weather stations at heliports, and that's an FAA rule, right? So the first thing I said was we got to change the rule. This is ridiculous. Sensor capabilities have expanded tremendously since 1940 when that rule was written. There was a reason for it, and it was a good reason back then. So we worked with FAA. I'll give them credit. FAA, we worked with the FAA, worked with NASA, and I helped get the standard written and published in January 2024. That's a framework for us to use lower cost weather sensors as trusted data as long as you follow certain rules. So that's the first key. You had to get the cost.
Don, really quickly, that's kind of where I came back to the start, where it's like there has to be a better acceptance of technology at every level, not just the public, private, and the federal level needs better acceptance of this technology.
And so we got that through because they knew that they weren't going to win a safety risk management case with me, because I was trying to point out already that
Because
helicopters
who's
are
gonna
crashing.
win?
All right. The second was we need to crowdsource the data we have. Road weather information systems. We're not allowed to use them for aviation, right? Why can't we add a salometer to that and close the gap?
And I was in Alaska, we also have waivers to use some unique like weather cameras and stuff like that. So there's got to be some alternate technologies that you can also use to give you weather.
Right. So we're trying to get that into a rule, and hopefully that'll come out as an advisory circular. The last thing I want to mention is that Hollister. I want to call out our friends at Hollister that have helped us. We're going to be deploying infrastructure out there. NASA's funded us $6 million. I want to thank Ernest also. We have 2 of the best weather sensing test beds in the world that are going to be operational at Fort Worth and at Hollister. And they're going to be operational test beds. And we'll be able to use that data to demonstrate the value of this information to the business case, while also getting that data in his system that you see out there and his system to monitor our data. We're going to show how the private sector can actually solve this problem. We just got to get that business case. And we want to work with you folks here in this area to take advantage of that capability and help to expand these ideas.
Yeah, one of the things we're working on together is, I didn't know anything about the weather other than looking at the sky until I met this guy. And then I realized that it was all two-dimensional, and how
the weather today is offered two-dimensional.
Yeah,
right,
it's
not
really
three-dimensional.
two-dimensional.
Right.
And I always thought, that this was a lot more sophisticated than what it was. And so, so he's getting these really cool LiDARs out here in Hollister area, I believe, right, is where we're doing this. And we're going to be doing the first three-dimensional live weather system using our GPUs and on our pods. And that would be the most advanced airspace
weather capability,
system
and integration
being made. So we're doing this right here in the marina, which is a really cool thing.
That's awesome.
2040 it would be if Abby, you were still at the FAA before we got that.
Yeah.
So that was 15 months ago. So look, there was a question that came up from the audience, and it's gotten some extra thumbs up that I think is really relevant to this, especially as I've heard the integration word thrown around a lot, and people talking about their different cool software. And the question here is, what's the vision for managing so many different platforms and use cases at low to mid elevation? So I want to start it off, and then I want to let her rip and let her riff, but take it easy, guys. So when I was at the FAA, we came up with this concept. So I know James talked about earlier on a panel that he was on the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee, and this was gathering people from a huge cross-section of not just the aviation ecosystem, but of society, because these are societal matters. And beyond visual line of sight, the idea of sending an aircraft that has no pilot on it outside of where you can see it is really different from people's mental models and schemas, and came off as scary. So it's taken us for freaking ever, and it's them now, at the FAA to put out this rule. And I hear that this rule should be coming out for the notice of proposed rulemaking eminently soon, maybe June, which is really exciting. In the meantime, we said we can't wait that long because we've got to get industry going. And so we came up with this idea that we got buy-in on called the Near-Term Approval Process, or NTAP, because we need to DYA just as much as everybody else. So in Fort Worth and in North Texas, the start of this is going on, because the question is, you've got all these different platforms, how do they come together? There was another question related to it that said the FAA is hands-off. That's not true. The FAA has just been unable to get this rule out for comment because there's administrative law and rule of law. Thank you, Dick Gephardt. Rule of law is what the foundation of our country is based on, and I, for one, believe in following rule of law. And so our way around that was, or our way to do that was to say, let's get this industry together, almost a team of rivals, if you will. Industry gets together and agrees, these are the standards, FAA makes sure they make a safety case, and then you test it. And so these systems are coming together as different platforms. I got buzzed by myself.
Yeah, good Lord.
By working together and creating interoperability and agreeing to those standards. Go, Clifford.
Yeah, when we started off, and
love
this
that I
kind of
got
goes a
buzzed.
little against some of the grains here, but it's the honest truth. Like I'm from the Valley, and venture capital, you get in a little amount of time to make a product and get to business. And in aviation, you have every time in the world, right? And so for me, I had to understand what the business case was for all of these businesses. And they're called provider of services to unmanned vehicles is what NASA was calling them. And what we learned years ago was that the business models that were being done weren't really sustainable for the amount of aircraft or drones that had businesses for them to be sustainable themselves over the next decade. And so what we realized really quickly was the amount of technology to aggregate all of these PSUs and data, even if you were a small startup like a drone operator, would be millions of dollars. In this case, you as a venture capital, like to say drone company, why would you spend millions of dollars aggregating an enormous amount of data when you're just trying to deliver a pizza? So we decided to say, okay, well, that's my background. I'm used to doing large data dumps and massive data centers and processing. And so we started to work with various PSUs that we knew were really good at their game, Dawn being one of them, and started partnering with Matrix Space, which is a really innovative small radar company that fits the bill, and Voli, which is doing a lot of really great products on doing remote ID and ADS-B, and various other infrastructure partners, and started aggregating that data and making a holistic view of what this actually is with all these different companies all in one platform, right? And we've been able to solve that, and that's pretty much what's happening on the other side of that door over there, is an aggregation of all of those partners. I mean, that's real data happening at our sensors that are at a tower in Oakland as we speak, right? So it is possible, and it has been done. And the next step for that is to start doing that at much large scale and bringing those costs down to where our investments will leak over into the drone space. You know, a lot of what we're doing on the infrastructure side for vertiports, because that's what we do, we're a vertiport operations company, the money that we're getting, the multi-million dollars to develop these infrastructure, what's a couple $100,000 on the infrastructure for the digital side when you're spending millions on top of that? So for us, we're getting our information and our data to make sure that the safety of these aircraft on the passenger side are happening according to the rules, and we're also safe, but we're also using that investment to allow drone communities to leverage the infrastructure that was already paid for by us as we're developing and rolling those out, right? And so it's a really great win-win for the small infrastructure providers. It's a win for the eVTOL manufacturers because they're getting something that is already paid for on the brick and mortar side. It lowers the safety element of it, but it also enables a much broader infrastructure play to kind of enable everyone to have a really great spot, you know, on the infrastructure side. I mean, we're already doing 27 locations across the country. We have over 400 locations being requested. I mean, the industry is there, the demand is there, and I really see this really playing out really well with everybody in the ecosystem. And you know, we're just trying to help there to enable everybody, but
awesome.
But that's what's happening on our system.
Thank you. Wait, so
Yeah.
Rob's next.
Oh, I didn't see.
Sorry. I think it kind of depends on who's fishing. I think it depends on who the stakeholder is, who the audience is, who the user is, who's paying for it. At DoD, when we had to come up with the way to certify, the way to approve, the way to launch drones, it was because we had no frickin' choice. We were at war, right? It wasn't like if we have to, if there's a business case, is there a use case? Well, yeah, people were dying, and we had to go, and you had to go now. So figure it out. That was the mission, right? So we did it, right? And so this one's a little bit different, but it's been done there. So now every time, and we all agree this is a new era. Right? This is a new era. This is, what do they call it? This is like the third era of aviation, right?
Well,
fourth, fifth, whatever. Okay, it's a new
Who's
era.
counting?
I like to call it a
wheels on the,
renaissance.
aircraft.
It's a
They call it a
renaissance.
new era. So now are we going to lose this one, or are we going to win this one? Yeah. Right? So somehow we got to convince whoever the hell's got to make the decisions, the FAA, Congress, whoever, the venture capitalists,
So
that we got to win
the
this
answer
era.
is we all need to make the commitment to win.
Okay, we all do.
All of us.
Okay, all right. So, but every time there's been this inflection point in transportation and a new era in it, right? It hasn't been about the machine. It hasn't necessarily been about the infrastructure. It hasn't been necessarily about the venture capitalists, right? It's about, you know, when we domesticated animals, the horse, right, and put a cart behind it, right? What did it do? It freed us from the tribe, from our little village, right? And we were able to plow, we were able to feed, we were able to move beyond, you know, the village, okay? It was about that, right? When we figured out necessarily how to build a ship, it wasn't about the ship, right? We circumvented the oceans and explored, okay? When we built the car, it wasn't about the car, it was about the freedom of movement, right, of people. When we built what was next? Let's talk about spaceships. When we built spaceships, it wasn't necessarily about the spaceship.
It was about beating the Russians.
We freed ourselves from the bounds of Earth, right? It wasn't about the rocket ship. It was that. So is this about the eVTOL? No. It's about. It isn't about advancing the plane or the eVTOL. It's about advancing humanity. Every time we change an era of transportation, we advance humanity, right? So how are we going to advance humanity this time? We need a moonshot. We tie this to a moonshot for the country, right? It isn't about necessarily advancing and beating California, beating Ohio or Texas. We will do that. We need to do that. I'm all in for that. Nothing against the Ohioans or Texans. Sorry, dude. I'll buy you a beer. We're going to go get buzzed together, brother.
Okay, you just got buzzed.
All right, I'm sorry. Hey, Mick Carter.
Yeah.
They tag teamed and beat the buzzer. You and I.
All right.
Follow me. So so let's do it, Abby. Let's do it. So let's advance humanity. Tie this to a moonshot. Get the nation behind us. All right? They aren't going to buy into a lot of these abstract discussions that us wonks and geeks are getting into. We got to get the nation behind us, get Congress behind us, sir, and then we go. Then we go. All right? That's what it's going to take.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how we should go any further, plus it's 4:45, so it's time for drinks. So I leave you. Please thank my guests, and remember, if you can dream it, you can drone it. Let's go.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was fantastic.